name is Yubi Siminetti with Breaking the Bias, and my partner in crime here, Joe Thurman. We founded Breaking the Bias last June. It spun out of our company that we started 5 years ago called Jobber Group, and the goal was to create practical application trainings for things that we're all doing every day anyway. So we want to have these discussions about bias and curiosity and empathy and conscious communication in terms of things that people do as part of their daily routine and their daily job responsibilities, like interviewing, sales, product development, those types of things. And so this piece we wanted to talk about today is all about empathy. And yeah, I'm going to share my screen and we'll jump in. Joe, do you want to kind of kick it off with your bias story?
Sure. Yeah.
That way you all, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, as you mentioned, part of a lot of the work that we do is around helping leaders, helping team members learn how to become more engaged with their teams, become better leaders, and that's through curiosity and empathy. And empathy is something that people think they either have or don't have in many cases, but it's really something that you can learn, and there's maturity levels to it. And so we always start with the fact that you have to know your own story to understand how empathy impacts you and how it can impact your team. And so self-reflection is a really big part of how empathy comes to life within our own lives. So we start with who are we, right? And so I am a co-founder based in Colorado. As you can see, I'm an African-American male who was raised in Colorado Springs. I will say that there are different challenges that I believe I've faced that kind of give me a lens on the world at times, but I also believe I have opportunities because of who I am. And in this time, as entrepreneurs, I think of even our story of being an online organization. We help companies with strategy. I feel for people who run other small businesses such as restaurants and understanding that they have a different entrepreneurial story than me and our team. And so as we look at this, like my story is just really someone who has been grateful. I'm grateful for the opportunities that technology has opened up for me. I understand the challenges that exist in the world, but I have a view and a lens of really how can we add more right now? How can we take the blessings that we have of being technology centric, remote centric, and share that with the world, and understanding how we can support and help. So it's different than kind of the normal bias stories we talk about, but that's the lens of where my brain is at in today's world and right now. So go ahead, Yubi.
Yeah, I'm Yubi Siminetti. My real name is Ubaldo. I grew up in the Midwest in Kansas, but I was the only Ubaldo for thousands of miles. And for me, I look white, but my dad's from Argentina, so I'm half Latino, but it's not something I ever really owned up to. And I took advantage of being this color. And I did experience bias just because of my name. And so I understand what that piece looks like, but I also have my own biases and, why I chose not to embrace the fact that I was Latino and honor that like I do today. So I've been in Colorado for 15 plus years now, technology industry, and just have come through a workplace shooting event and just come through different organizations, different cultures that, really taught me at the end of the day that there's so much better that we can do as people and as companies and as leaders within companies to create a more inclusive workplace for everybody. And a big part of that is empathy, and that's why we're doing this today. So just, something to think about as far as your own bias stories. It's a great way to start down this path of understanding who you are, and how your biases have sort of really shaped your story. And we're going to get into a little bit of that. So what we ask for everyone is right here on the screen. Let's use this time to learn, to become curious as we develop this code of empathy together, and then talk about, and the takeaways we want you to have are how can we apply this to into a strategy, whether it's a diversity and inclusion strategy or just a general employee engagement strategy, and how do we create impact within our organization by doing this? So please, looking forward to discussing that with you all. Really, if you walk out of here with awareness, and if you walk out of here with a strong foundation for going back and having these conversations with your team, you will be able to expand your skills as they relate to empathy, for example, your leadership skills. And we believe that empathy is a competency that you can develop, and that's what we're going to talk about today. Here's how we kick it off. Joe?
So one of the interesting things, back to what we were talking about with a story, again, please engage via chat or via the hand raise. We can see everyone who's on, so we can see you guys as the panelists, but please engage. So how many of you guys have heard of Maslow's hierarchy at any time? I see a few hand raises, quite a few. Yep, all of them going up. Yeah, a lot, everyone. All right, cool. So when you think of that, and with the situation that we're in right now, right, it's understanding that our worldview really creates our ability to be empathetic to groups that are different than us, to team members that are different to us, to people who are in different situations. We're going to talk about empathy circles and how it really is a finite resource. And in times like this, we really have to understand how to harness that in different situations, in different times, so that we can be the best leaders, be the best team members, and be the best family members, right? A lot of times right now, we're having to think about our family, our friends, a lot of the different things that we are working through. And so as leaders right now in the professional world, it's really understanding that right now, everyone's mind is really on our needs and our safety, right? And then we go home and we're looking at love and belonging. There are a lot of people in the world right now who aren't thinking of truly trying to achieve the biggest thing right now, right? They're worried about safety and security. And we need to understand that depending on what people have or their means or where they're at on our team or someone who's just starting out in their career, this is a very, very scary situation to them. And understanding our world and our perspective, and then understanding that everyone else has this blend of what we look at as how Maslow's hierarchy can be interpreted to the environment that has shaped it, the way we see the world. Understanding that is a great way as leaders for us to have perspective of how to think of what we're talking about in meetings, what we're presenting, how we're creating the right energy for our team, and how we're addressing things that are really top of mind from day to day. UB, do you want to chime in on that?
No, I think we'll get into it this next slide here a little bit. So, and again, in really this once in a lifetime unique situation that we're in, this to me is now taken on a little different impact or perception, because normally, yes, we have empathy circles, right? And as we grow up, we learn to spread our empathy across, first of all, ourselves, going back to the hierarchy of needs that Joe talked about, but then we can slowly expand out to family, to friends, then you can see as you go further out, it's things that aren't as close to us. And, what we normally talk about is how do we expand our empathy to really encompass all of these. And, but in today's world where we're working remote now and we're all, for the most part, having to sort of self-isolate, this becomes an interesting topic to discuss, right? Because, right, and Joe talked about it a little bit. I mean, we all have these very specific needs in this very moment in time that we need to take care of, our safety, our health. But that shouldn't stop us from trying to figure out in this remote world that we're all living in, how do we still continue to expand, even though we don't have the physical ability to interact with somebody? How do we still expand our empathy for our teammates who we're only seeing on Zoom now? How do we as leaders expand our empathy for our clients who normally we would be, visiting them every day or every month, and now again we're having to communicate solely via this technology? So it's really starting to understand for yourself, what does this model look like, and then taking that and trying to figure out how you can expand out your empathy to others who normally wouldn't get empathy from you, for example.
Yeah, and one thing to keep in mind as we look at that is that it's really important to understand that it is not an endless resource. And you have to think about that it even takes, you have to be empathetic to yourself. And so that circle in the middle, you have to realize that you need to, during these times, know what it takes to recharge, know what it takes to step away, know what it takes to redirect that empathy, because it really does, in our current situation, it has to reach out to humanity. And it has to reach out to our team members across lines, across the in-groups, out-groups that we'll talk about. But it's so important for just the awareness of the fact that empathy is something that you really have to harness and direct, and it is not something that you have endless amounts of. It is also not something that is just on or off, but we're going to dive into kind of the science and the thought behind that as well. So we'll click on to the next one. So mirror neurons are a very interesting thing to understand. We would recommend that you research them even more, but they're in the prefrontal cortex, and they basically help us to, they're a great learning tool. But if you think of babies, and as young babies, when you do something in front of them, they start to mirror it, right? They start to learn. That's how it forms in our brain. It's something that we can really start to understand what it is that we're seeing it, and our brain will interpret it and mirror it. As adults, it's something that actually gives us the ability to understand what someone else is going through. So if you think of a situation where you see someone that is hurt, someone gets a cut or something like that, and maybe it sends a little tinge through your body. It's really our brain's ability to interpret and actually feel the same thing as if it's happening to us, just to a lesser degree, right? So as this says, it's really a simulation of an action. And it's something that is extremely powerful when you understand that our brains have that capability that are built in, both from a survival mechanism and from a learning mechanism, so that we can understand and interpret that information that's coming in, and we observe it, our brain interprets it, and almost lets us experience it to a lesser degree through simulation. And that's a very powerful weapon that, from a biological perspective, is built in as a trigger for empathy that kind of starts this process of understanding and perspective taking.
So here's a quick little video we like to play, all right? I mean, we all raise your hand if you yawn during this video.
Oh, we already got one. That was fast. That was like instant. We got three.
Okay, that's enough. So that, that's again, that's a good example of how our how our brains just see an action and then simulate it. But that's taking it a little further, right? Because now we're actually, when someone else is yawning, you're yawning. So it's like when you're watching a movie and you can start crying because you can mirror the emotions that you're witnessing on the TV or on the movie screen. Joe, you want to talk about cognitive empathy here?
Yeah, for sure. So how many people on the call feel like empathy is just something you either have or you don't have? By a show of hands, is it something that you just either have or something you could turn on or turn off? Anyone feel that way? Just a couple. Yeah, a couple. Okay. A few more now. so that's good. But the way that we teach this, and the whole purpose of this, is that it's not something that can be, it's not something that either is or is not. There are actually different types of empathy, different ways that we can harness it, and especially as leaders. So cognitive empathy is something that is really something that's important to understand. So look at these pictures and think of, like, you see the eye up in the corner on the oven, right? And how many people can think through the times where, when you were a kid, you burned your hand and it was something that really hurt you right then? And so as you look at that, it's really your brain going into your memory and just bringing back your memory of what it felt like when you burned your hand, or when you ate a hot pepper, or when you sat on a cactus, right? And so it's really, you're going into your memory and you're relating it to, hey, Joe, I know exactly how you feel when you stepped on that cactus out there. But you actually really just remember how you feel when you stepped on a cactus. So if you click to the next one.
Yeah, it's very much this, right? Like we, who's to say the person on the left doesn't like having an arrow in their rear, right? Like that just, I'm assuming that because it hurt me in my experience, I'm presenting that as, oh yeah, I know exactly how you feel. No, I know how I feel. And I'm assuming that of you, but it may be completely opposite, right?
And this is on the lower level of the maturity model of empathy, right? And especially in these situations, think about, we don't know how our team members feel in this situation. We don't know what they're dealing with at night. We know what we're dealing with. We know every day how we're processing it, how we're dealing with it when we wake up. But we don't know exactly how they feel. And so as leaders, we have to start with the fact that we understand that we do not know exactly how our teams feel about this. We have to give them space to talk about it. We have to give them space to enlighten us on how they feel, because it feels different to every person in this current situation. And this level of empathy is very low on the emotional intelligence scale, because it's really just a cognitive behavior. It's going into your long-term memory and bringing something back up. In this instance, it's going into your short-term memory and bringing something back up. And it's a way that we can step into dangerous areas of leaders, because we're just then reflecting everything we have on to everyone else, as opposed to opening those doors and listening and understanding that this quote at the bottom of the screen is not true. We don't know how they feel. We know how we feel. And we need to give our team members, our leaders, our families, everyone space to let us know and talk to us about how they feel. So that's the first level.
Fair. I mean, that, this is a first step in the right direction. Right?
Agree. Totally.
It is saying, and I think it was more of a survival mechanism, way back when, of trying to connect with somebody. So we're on the right path. But yeah, to Joe's point, there's a next level that we need to get to. So we'll watch this little uncomfortable. Raise your hand if you all feel anything.
If you're dreading this already, and
yeah, right. Sorry.
Oh, that's funny. I love the quick hand raises. You're getting really bad.
Now, you can imagine that there are a lot of kids trying to do this at home now, and I'm sure their parents are like, oh man, teachers deserve raises. But we don't need to watch that again. So yeah, affective empathy is sort of that next level, right? It's a reaction. We see something happening, and we're using these pictures of babies because, when we see a baby yawning or the scared baby in the bottom left corner, we start to understand exactly what that means and translate that into a reaction now that we're going to take, right? Put the baby to sleep, or maybe the baby's hungry, or whatever it might be. But that's sort of the next level is, okay, now we're starting to recognize and understand emotions in others. But we're still reacting to that, right, Joe? Like it's still a reaction.
Totally. And Sarah, do you have a question, or is your hand just still up from the scissor? Okay, never mind. So it's still a reaction, right? And in difficult times, it's sometimes the wrong reaction, right? We don't know if sadness or anger or how someone is going to deal with their day. We're going to get into an exercise that we do as a team at the beginning of every meeting at the end of this, but it is that next level, and it's that blend of cognitive, hey, I remember, I can think into history of how I would have felt. I can think of how I would have felt. And then I believe I can interpret mirror neurons and everything firing how you feel. I believe I can interpret this, but I cannot react with that same thing. And that's when in some of our bigger modules, we teach about conscious communication. And it's not that reaction of emotion. It's people are looking for that support in this time. So if I react with anger to anger, but it's really that person is angry at the situation or angry at the day or just angry today. They don't need that affective empathy. They don't need that emotion to enter in. And again, this is separating out as how do we elevate as team members? How do we elevate as leaders? How do we elevate as family members? Is that, when someone calls crying, we have to start to figure out what we can do with it, how we can help them. And reaction is not always the most powerful. It's very natural. In this situation, I'll say it's probably by default where most of us go, is to this and a blend of the two. And but it's really just understanding that when we're trying to impact change and when we're trying to help people through situations, it's tough when we live in the cognitive and affective empathy space.
Yeah, and this potentially could be the more dangerous one in certain circumstances. I mean, I think in this day and age of social media and political divide, this one is probably the one we see the most that exhibits itself in that anger more so than anything, right? And that those reactions that aren't well thought out and aren't truly understood, and we've all done it, right? And that's that's part of the bias conversation we have in the other part of our workshop, where we have to become more aware of why we're reacting like that. Like, that's sort of on us, but at the same time, this can become pretty dangerous, more so than any of the other levels. So something to think about. But ultimately, it gets us to sort of this final level of empathy in our maturity model, this compassionate empathy. And this is where I think really great leaders thrive, because you're taking everything now, and so not only are you seeing an emotion within one of your employees, for example, but you're also taking yourself out of that understanding. You're not applying your experience to that. You're understanding that someone has an emotion that they're going through right now, and you're applying logic to it, and you're saying to yourself, how can I help now? How can I help this person? That's really the next level, and really the top level here that we want people to be able to get to, right, Joe?
Yeah, I mean, if you think about even this picture, right? If the person at the top was only operating in cognitive empathy, they would be thinking about the time that they were scared. They couldn't find that next hand or foothold, and they really wished someone was at the top helping them. And all they would do is relate to how they felt. And then they would probably go into affective empathy of fear or of anxiety or of any of those things. And when all of that is at work, both of the people in this picture are now in danger, right? The person at the top may be trying to help, but they have anxiety, they have fear, they're thinking about when they were in that, and then they start to spiral. We have to find that way to get to what Yubi was saying, that how do I understand the emotion that's happening, understand the situation that's happening, and take logical and compassionate steps to act, not to react, to act, right? And to say, this is causing me to action. And in the world today, we're seeing more of that, which I'm grateful for. I mean, it's how can people act? Sometimes there's a very tight line between reaction and action. But right now, we're starting to see more companies, more people taking action to say, how can we support? How can we build on this? How can we do more? And so the next one really talks about this model of how do you really get there, right? And how can you understand that at the top level, you're able to remain in control of your personal emotions, while others around you, your team, your peers, they're extremely emotional, right? It's a personal situation, and that's going to be happening. How are you able to reason and support the right decisions and make the right decisions? And ultimately, for us to be more thoughtful, more inclusive, of the situation that's happening to everyone around us right now at different levels, to different degrees, but we're all going through it. And I can't think of a time in the world where that has been the case. We need more leaders. I mean, it's not about a title. It's not about a position. It's about an individual's action of being a leader or becoming a leader. And that's really where understanding that these degrees exist, and that empathy always exists. It's always in the room. It enters the room when you come in. Sometimes someone just needs to vent, and if you are there, you're absorbing it. Their empathy is going, and you're not necessarily responding to their emotion, but you're absorbing it. And you ever remember those times where someone's like, I just needed that. Thank you so much. And you're like, I didn't say anything. I didn't do anything. You didn't react, but you supported. And I think that's a huge part of all of this as we tie it all together.
Yeah. And yeah, I mean, I think it's just the important thing to remember here is that, you know, our brain is doing a lot of this stuff automatically. And so we don't want people to feel guilty or feel like they're not empathetic or, you know, they have no soul or whatever, right? Like it's not that. It's just basically understanding like what are your biases and how have they sort of formed your empathetic model of that surrounds you, you know, those circles. If you can start to understand that and become really clear about that for yourself, your bias story, then this becomes really easy. And it will always take work and practice, but you can start to understand how compassionate empathy as a leader can truly change how an organization can really, you know, flow, and how people can start to feel like they actually belong, because the leaders of the organization have all come together and are anticipating needs, right? They're acting ahead of time, because they understand and have logically reasoned what, in a situation like this, for example, what could possibly their employees could possibly be going through.
Yeah. By a show of hands really quick, how many people have a hard stop in 30 minutes? There's about 10 or 12 minutes left. Okay, so we have a few. UB, do you want to jump to the end really quick just to give a quick takeaway, and then we'll come back and do the 10 minutes? Just give the exercise really quick for people who have to jump off the phone. We'll just do this really quick for the people who have to leave.
Let me see if I can. I guess I'll just pop through real quick.
It's one thing to take to your teams, and then we have about 10 minutes left of the presentation that we'll do with everyone else. So this is a good takeaway. We do it at the beginning of every big team meeting. Everyone jumps on. We actually have articles about it, but it's really the traffic light check-in, and we call it an empathy activator. It's as simple as whoever's facilitating the call, just asking everyone. It's got basically like a roll call, and people respond with red, yellow, green. Sometimes people say yellow, green. Sometimes people say red, yellow. Sometimes people say purple. That means something different. But ultimately, it really is something that empowers our team to be more considerate, compassionate, and empathetic to each other, right? Taking the load off of someone who's a red today, who's usually a green, but is a red today. And you don't have to go into the details of why, but it's really powerful to say, even as leaders, you know, today on one of our main calls, I know I was yellow, some other people were green. By the end of the call, most of everyone was green. And it's lifting everyone up, but also being okay as a leader to be yellow or red, and showing that vulnerability is huge. And we highly recommend that in these times on Zoom calls. It works amazing. And it's just something that you can use with your teams. So wanted to make sure that everyone left with a little bit of a takeaway. We lost like 3 earlier, but I know at least 5 people raised their hand that they have to jump off in 30 minutes. So at the 30-minute mark. So wanted to throw this in for anyone who has to jump off. Thank you for joining us. And for anyone who's staying, we'll go back and just talk about a little bit of the Ingroup Outgroup. Ubi, do you want to talk about the traffic light anymore since we already covered that? Are you good?
No, I think we're good. I think, you know, it is, you know, again, to Joe's point, like whoever's leading the meeting, for example, kind of needs to lead off with this, because it is a little bit uncomfortable at first. But yeah, at the end of the day, what we end up seeing is those people who are in the yellow and the red categories get help from the rest of their teammates, because they don't want to feel excluded from participating in the work that's going on, but they know that they can't really live up to what they were planning to do that day. And it could be for any reason, right? It could be for a migraine, or it could be because they got cut off in traffic. We don't know. And we don't need to know. But what we know just based on the color is that we as a team need to step up and help that person so that they still feel included. And so we give them, we ask, hey, how about you do this, and we'll take on your responsibilities for the day. And then we see a change of color over time, even in just a day. So it really is a really impactful, easy thing to implement, especially on Zoom calls. It's a great way to connect with your team. So let's jump back now for just the last few minutes and talk about this us versus them in-group out-group dynamics. How many, show of hands, have heard or read about in-group out-group dynamics? Awesome. So quite a few. That's great. Yeah, this empathy obviously plays very heavily into this, and we always talk about we use the sports analogy, right? Like you've got Broncos versus the Raiders. And there's, anybody who's a Raiders fan is automatically in our out group. But if you take away the uniform, what do you have? You have people who love sports. They love their team. They love football, right? They love the competition of it. So there's a lot of similarities there, which would put us into the same in-group then at that point. So how many of you, have seen sort of these similar situations where you work? Yeah,
Wow.
mean, almost everybody.
That was a lot of hands.
Yeah.
I mean, and this is really, this is what we have to protect against right now in our traditional teachings and the things that we go in and work with customers on. It's really through that lens of diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, right? It's not saying, hey, we're inviting you in, but you have to sit over there, or you can come in as long as you're in the Batman costume. It's really about us understanding everything, and in this time, it's understanding everyone's mental differences. So mental diversity, physical diversity, neurodiversity, external diversity, everything, family diversity. On the web calls, we talk about that if you're single or just a couple, you have a different setting at home than a family that has 3 kids. And it's understanding that you can't start to exclude people because, oh, well, they're going to have their dog and kids in the background, and I just don't feel like being on that call right now. We're just going to form our own groups. It's something we have to really be thoughtful of and understanding of as we go more remote. It still happens, and it's something that we need to think through around how do we invite everyone into the conversation emotionally, physically, personally. And that's where, even back to the traffic light, we usually do that at the end, but the traffic light invites everyone into the call, into the business, into the decisions that day emotionally. Even if you're red, you're invited. You can bring your whole self to work because you still showed up to the call. If you don't want to show up to the call, we still have people who say, hey, I just need a personal day right now. I just need time right now. And that's fine. And you're still not excluded. We understand what people have to go through right now, or anytime, even when we're not in an epidemic or these current situations. So this is something to guard against as leaders, as team members, that we really have to break down these barriers.
Yeah, I mean, this is, it's a truly level setting opportunity that we find ourselves in right now, but it can very well go the other way where, certain groups of people who we consider in our out groups, for example, get left out. And when we're already having to self-isolate, that's just compounding the problem. And so it's really a very rare opportunity that organizations have right now to sort of reboot their inclusion strategy, and using this information, using technology like Zoom to really include everybody, to really start to bring everybody into your in-group and to the organization's in-group, like to redefine what that means as an organization. Because you don't want to get into, 4 of the 5 situations that we see here, right? Like this is, this is what a lot of organizations are seeing, not necessarily the inclusion, but things that sort of resemble inclusion, but when you really dig down deep, it's not, right? And I think insurrection is where a lot of companies are starting to find themselves now. We've been talking about this diversity and inclusion conversation for many years, but I don't think companies have really taken it seriously until about now. And that's because you have employees who aren't willing to take it anymore.
Yeah, and I think right now it's a sensitive time, and we need to be thoughtful about all of this in our companies, in our communities, across the board. And I think that is just something that we have to be mindful of. And how do we have this more inclusive mindset, not the us versus them, not an empathy circle that is extremely limited. Limited empathy circles lead to this upper right corner. That's where limited empathy leads to. And, I mean, best case, yeah, it leads to segregation or integration. You're here, but you're not really here. And so as our teams, as the leaders on the call, as team members on the call, this all ties together so closely to where if you think of that empathy circle, and if it doesn't reach groups and it doesn't reach people on our teams, then we're just not going to be working in it all together. And we keep seeing the tweets or the posts about we're all in this together, and that really needs to mean something. And it's up to every individual to interpret how we can be more inclusive.
Yeah, and it absolutely needs to be deliberate, like now more than ever. Like it shouldn't be, it shouldn't be left up to one person or a small team of people within the organization who have been given the diversity and inclusion or HR responsibilities. This is everybody now. Everybody needs to be involved with this.
So yeah, I mean, in closing, it's really just how do we really understand the power of empathy, right? And it's not optional. It's always on. It's always at play, just as much as our unconscious bias is. It's always on. And then really just for our different groups, how do we target? How do we redirect? How do we maximize the reach of our empathy? And how do we not think of only having empathy for the groups that we belong to, our in groups, the Batmans of the world, but making sure that our empathy reaches all of the superheroes. I'm not a Marvel or either, so you're going to have to correct me, but whichever group we need to, it needs to be all of them.
Well, and I think, I think we're seeing that in really interesting ways right now. So, for example, when this all started to happen and they, were forcing the self-isolation, closing restaurants, I mean, that's millions and millions of people who were immediately overnight out of a job. And I have a lot of friends in that industry here in Denver, and it's heartbreaking, right? And but it's very easy because we are isolated in our own homes to sort of turn a blind eye to that, right? But so how do we expand our empathy circle to help people like that? I mean, I think we're starting to see in this time that the people in this country who who this is sort of a normal thing, right? Living paycheck to paycheck, or not having childcare, not being able to pay rent. Like for some people, that's just normal every day. And now we're in a situation where we're all there in some way, shape, or form. And so it's just been really interesting to see sort of the empathy focuses change, which is great. Now I think the goal is, well, how do we keep that going now, right? Like how do we truly redefine our definitions of our own in groups and maintain that and build up to that compassionate empathy level? I think that's going to be the challenge moving forward, but we have to have this place of this baseline understanding of what empathy is, how our brains work to start, right? To start down that road. But again, this is a really unique once in a lifetime opportunity to jumpstart that for all of us. Ultimately, I think, you know, why does this matter to all of us? Why does this matter to you as leaders and as people in your organization? One, it's that team cohesion, right? Like, especially now, we have, the only way our businesses are going to survive is by continuing to build community and to continue to build an inclusive virtual workplace as it is now, but really focus on taking care of each other and continuing to build that cohesion as an organization, because otherwise you might not have an organization coming out of something like this. And this is just it's a better, you know, like, it's just a better way to be at the end of the day. Like, this is just be better. And this is a great way to do that. And again, we're not pointing fingers and saying, well, you're a bad person because you weren't. No, it's, again, a lot of this is based in neuroscience. In fact, our brains just do these things automatically, unconsciously. So we can be better now by understanding how our brains work, and taking control of that and being more curious, asking more questions of our fellow coworkers and our team members, and then by being better, more compassionate leaders. And really, this leads to better products and services, because now we're anticipating needs, and now we're getting out of our own way to build a product that really can be used by anybody and everybody. I mean, this is where innovation happens. It's just taking those obstacles that we put in front of ourselves, and kind of working through those and coming out to just build a better company.
Yeah, and I mean, that brings us to the end. We'll open up for a couple questions. We have a few minutes. Our only ask is that, you know, we hope you got something out of this. If you did, we're going to continue to host this just every Tuesday and Thursday for the next few weeks, just for people who are really looking to, you know, be better leaders, better teammates, just small little nuggets that can help us all be better as we navigate through this. So our only ask would be to share it with your friends. Let them know Tuesdays, Thursdays, 2:00, we'll be doing this, and we'll try to keep it 45 minutes. It'll be relatively the same content for this. This is the part that we're just really believe is most impactful right now. So we'll be just talking about this, and if you really found it valuable, we ask that you share. If you have questions, you can chat us or raise your hand. We have maybe like 2 minutes. Any questions? Anybody want to ask anything? I don't think I have my chat on.
Yeah, and you should get an email after the end of this, that has a couple ways for you to reach out to us after the fact. So you can set up a time to chat with us. I mean, we want to be there for everybody. So I think it's a Calendly link that you'll get that gives you the ability to set up like a 30-minute call with us if you want to chat through more of this in depth as it relates to, you know, your personal situation, your work situation. And then, yeah, like Joe said, please share your feedback with us. We want to hear how we can continue to improve this. This is always dynamic, kind of flowing information that we want to make sure is relevant. So,
well, for the ones that stayed on, we appreciate it. Thomas, Raja, Katie, Nicole, Paul, Olivia, Nina, Christina, Abby. I'm scrolling kind of weird. Jacob, we thank you guys for staying on. Enjoy the rest of your day. It was a great group on the phone, or a great group on this call. So we'll just keep doing this, and thank you guys.